Hi, Nate. Welcome.
Hi, Kathy. Good to be here.
So good to see you. Tell us where you are in the world right now.
I'm sitting in my bedroom in Costa Rica. We've been here for about 9 months, and it's crazy. It's crazy to hear. Home is Utah for me in Salt Lake City, and I'm getting pictures from friends and family of these late spring winter storms and snow covering the ground. And I'm looking out the window, and I literally can see like monkeys. And I'm a 2-minute walk from the beach and living in what some would describe as paradise.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this word that I didn't know it existed until I saw your Facebook post. And it was one of those moments of yes, this is the word I've been looking for. Let's talk more about this. But also just the depth that comes with this phrase. Do you mind sharing just how you found this word?
Yeah, I'm honestly, I've been on a very, very long faith journey. Uh,
Mm.
and back in my, so I don't know how much of your audience is LDS or has an LDS background, but I'm assuming a fair chunk. But I was raised in the Mormon church, and it's a very high demand religion. And there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of pressure, both cultural and doctrinal. And I didn't realize it until I got into my mid 20s that I was experiencing a lot of anxiety around my worthiness in the eyes of God, my worthiness to be loved. I was afraid that if people saw my weaknesses, my imperfections, my struggles, that I would become an outcast, that I would be a disappointment, that I would lose my good name and my reputation. I was just so afraid of messing up, of falling short. And so in my mid 20s, I decided to take a little bit of a break from church attendance and see if I took a break from that, if some of the shame and anxiety that I was feeling would leave along with it. And to my surprise, it did.
Mm.
And so I kind of had this really strange question of like, how much of this is me and how much of this is the culture that I come from, and what is this? And I didn't really fully understand it. And then I ended up coming back to the church. I moved back to Utah. I came back to the church largely because I met a girl who wanted to get married in the church, and talked to one of a church leader who basically said, hey, like, if you can find a way to make the church work for you and live a little bit less of an orthodox life, more of a nuanced, like do Mormonism the way that Nate would do Mormonism, that's good enough for me. And I loved him for that. And so I started trying to figure out what parts of the doctrine and the culture really fit for me and that I really liked, and then what parts caused me a lot of stress and pressure and anxiety. And I did my best to kind of create more space for people who who experienced the same type of shame and anxiety and negative emotions that I felt, to kind of feel free to attend church, and I could connect with them in that way. So I started doing a lot of writing about that, um, and I know I rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Um, and then it's kind of in that journey that I discovered the term scrupulosity. And the word scrupulosity it's essentially spiritual OCD, or it's a type of spiritual perfectionism, where you become hyper fixated on doing all of your religious rites and rituals perfectly. And if you don't do them that way, then like it becomes very problematic. It causes a lot of anxiety and it causes a lot of worry. And as I started talking about this with my wife, she mentioned this phrase that she had kind of come up with on her own, or maybe she heard it from a friend, but a sense of perpetual inadequacy, and how she
Mm.
felt in her upbringing in this same community, that she just constantly felt this sense of perpetual inadequacy. And as we've had this conversation back and forth, we realized that to one degree or another, we both have suffered from this scrupulosity, this spiritual perfectionism, spiritual
Yeah.
obsessive compulsive disorder, where we felt like our worth was tied to our ability to execute on certain spiritual practices perfectly. And if we didn't do that, then we were letting ourselves down, letting God down, letting our friends and family down, letting our congregation down, and just being a big fat disappointment for so many people.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. There's so
Yeah.
much vulnerability in saying those things out loud, but also sharing our own path and our own journey. And that questioning, right? One of the books on my own path that really kind of helped me to start questioning is called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind by Vishen Lakhiani. And he talks about the culture scape. And especially in Utah, we have a huge culture scape. And so to really kind of dissect the culture from doctrine, from, teachings of Christ and relationship with God is, it's hard to do when you're in it. And it's hard to, for me, it was a challenge to figure out like what choices were really mine and what did I really make and what was I just told to do and told to be. And I really love what you're sharing just with what this word is, because I think it's so important that we talk about it, because I think at one point or another, we all experience that in different forms. And having that awareness around it helps us, I think, to have compassion and to foster and nurture how things can be a different way. And that's really what it sounds like, that you've started this path to transformation, this path to changing your mindset and shifting the way that maybe you were told things were supposed to be. And that's a brave thing to do.
Yeah.
So good job, you.
Thank you. It's really interesting because it really requires a certain amount of courage to break free from this, because so much of scrupulosity-based behavior is based on fear of punishment, fear of being cut off, fear of like excommunication, fear of like all these severing responses, whether you're being severed from God or severed from relationships with your family, severed from like your marriage could fall apart. There's all these things that could happen if you let down this mask, if you stop being perfect. And so you feel all this pressure to keep up appearances and to continue to be perfect, even though underneath you're not. And so it's such a fear-based response that it's hard to make choices that are actually yours. It's hard to make choices because they're the things that you want or the things that align with your values or they bring you joy. You kind of get to this place where all the things that you do and all the choices that you make are made out of fear of punishment or trying to avoid a negative outcome. I remember, I don't know how much you want me to go into some of this stuff, but
go ahead.
So I remember specifically there was moments, especially like serving a full-time mission for the church. I spent 24 months in Chile. And I remember being taught there that the blessings that I would experience on my mission would be directly tied to my obedience. And if I was disobedient, then God would revoke blessings. And not only that, but if I had the gospel, this beautiful gift, and I had the opportunity to share it with somebody and I didn't do that, then their blood would be on my hands. And I felt that like in a very real way. And then I coupled that with the way that I was raised. And this sounds really strange or maybe a little conceited to say, but I was raised a little bit like a golden boy. Like everybody just told me, oh, you're so great. You're going to be such a great missionary. You're going to pick up the language so fast. You're going to be a leader. You're going to bring so many souls to God. Like ever since I was a kid, people, and maybe they talk like that to everybody, but I felt excited to be a missionary. I was looking forward to the opportunity. I had dreams about the lives I would change and the people I would convert and the stories I would have to tell afterwards. And when I got out onto my mission, I tried to be strictly obedient and I tried to open my mouth as much as possible. The language came really quick to me. And what happened is nothing. Like I even got called to one of the most I got the area I was in Chile was known for having a lot of conversions. Like it was that they said, you know, that the people of Chile were really humble and ready for the gospel. And so I was really excited. I literally had like thoughts beforehand before leaving of like having people lined up to be baptized by Elder Bagley, you know. And I had anyway, the list of stories that I had that kind of primed me for this amazing spiritual 2-year experience is very long. And then when I got out on the mission, it was lots of failure. I didn't get along with my mission companions very well. I think in large part because I was so hyper focused on the rules, it was hard for me to like connect with them and be human. I was a little critical of them not being as diligent or religious or wanting to do the mission the same way I did. So I didn't feel like I made as many friends there as I thought I would. I didn't get leadership opportunities. And I went through my entire first year of my mission without having a baptism. And I'm looking around at missionaries that I consider to be like worse Spanish speakers, less obedient, whatever, and they're baptizing lots of people. And I'm like, what is it about me? Did I like commit some sin that I haven't repented of? Am I not being strictly obedient enough? So what do? I ramp up the pressure. I ramp up the guilt. I ramp up the shame. I go through my mental index of all the things that I've done wrong. And I worked myself into a deep depression. And it was bad. It was bad enough that my parents started writing my mission president and asking for him to check on me. They were worried about my mental health and my emotional health. And I came home. I remember when I left on my mission, my mom told me, work as hard as you can. And if you come home and you need an ambulance, we'll have one waiting for you. Like the expectation was that you just work until you can't work anymore. And I remember coming home and I was so depressed. I just like laid in bed for several days. And I don't have a lot of, I have a lot of fond memories, but I don't have the type of memories that I expected to have from that experience. And that's one microcosm of my overall religious experience. Is I was so caught up in the rules and in being responsible for other people's salvation and in doing things the right way that I think I couldn't see the forest from the trees. And it took a big toll on me.
Well, and it also feels like that relationship with Christ and with God shifted, that it was now filled with fear and filled with shame and just that push and that drive to do more and to do better. What did you then do?
Yeah. I definitely think that type of God was the God that I had known for my entire life in one way or another. It was, there's a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. And the way that we do things is the right way. There's there's like the right path, and then all the other paths might be good, but they're not as good. They're not the right path. They're not the capital T true path. And so the mission was like a magnifying glass of that experience. And it's taken me the better part of a decade to try and parse out like who God is and what my relationship with God looks like. And a huge first step, I don't know if it was the first step, but a huge step has been learning to make choices because they're the choices that I want to make, and becoming clear on my values and making choices that are aligned with my values instead of making choices because an external authority is requiring them of me. I understand why people oftentimes want to rely on a church, a religion, an expert, some other voice to guide them on their path, because then they don't have to be responsible for their choices. You know, they can say, oh, such and such person said this is the way to do it, so if I do it this way, I'm good. It takes away a little bit of anxiety. It takes away a little bit of pressure.
And accountability.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing, is it takes away some accountability as well. And it's relieving to have somebody take accountability for your choices, because then you don't have to be responsible for them anymore. But it also means you lose your ability to choose for yourself. And it puts you in a really precarious situation when that external authority asks you to do something that's contrary to your values and who you are as a person. It creates cognitive dissonance when
Yes.
when what you either have to change what you believe to fit your actions, or you have to change your actions to fit what you believe. And a lot of people, I personally got really good at changing my beliefs to fit my actions. I found a lot of justifications. I found a lot of excuses and reasons why I could make the choices that I made, because they were coming from an external authority that I trusted a lot and had a lot of confidence in. And as I have gained a lot more clarity around my own personal values, and then decided to start making choices based not on fear of punishment, sometimes even making the opposite choice that I would normally make, I've found that I've gained a lot more power. And a lot more confidence, and the anxiety and the fear and the control that the scrupulosity had over my life has definitely started to wane. An example of this is going to sound really silly to a lot of people, and other people might be shocked, but I had never tasted coffee until, well, we'll start with, I had never tasted coffee. And I would avoid coffee flavored jelly beans. If somebody offered me tiramisu, I was like, it has coffee in it. Mormons don't ingest coffee. It's against the rules. And I was very, very strict with those rules. And like it was like it's a big deal. It's a big deal in our in that Mormon culture to not drink coffee. And then one day I was like, why am I so afraid of coffee? It's purely based on fear. I'm afraid that if I have a drink of coffee, a metaphorical lightning bolt is going to shoot out of the heavens, and it's going to affect like some sort of relationship with God, with higher power, with my own conscience, with my family, whatever. And I realized it's a very irrational fear. So I was like, okay, I am not going to make fear-based choices anymore. So I'm going to taste coffee. And I went to my friend's house, and they are coffee aficionados. And they were like, we're going to make you the best cup of coffee on the planet. And they made me this latte, and I had a drink, and I was like, oh, that's what coffee tastes like. And they're like, do you like it? And I said, nope. And now I still don't drink coffee. But the reason I don't drink coffee isn't because I'm afraid of some punishment from God, or afraid that I'm going to lose status in the church, or afraid that my parents are going to be disappointed in me, or afraid that my wife is going to divorce me, or afraid that my body is going to wither away and die. The reason I don't drink coffee is because I don't like the flavor of coffee. It's the same reason. Yeah. Anyway.
But I love that you made a conscious choice to not let fear dictate the way that you're making decisions.
Yeah.
And
it was
I'm
terrifying.
Of course it is, because it's all the things you fear.
They like hand me this Yeti mug full of warm brown liquid, and I set it on the kitchen table, and I literally sat there and stared at it for like a solid 3 or 4 minutes, and everybody was laughing, and I'm like, this is like a thing that I'm genuinely coming face to face with a fear that I've had my entire life, for over 30 years of my life. And I don't want to put it sounds so silly, but it was a really big, I had to dig deep to take that sip of coffee.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to a little bit about what you're saying with your personal values, and how, it kind of, have you read any of Glennon Doyle's writings?
Yeah.
She talks a lot about, you got to burn everything down to kind of rebuild. Father Franciscan Friar Richard Rohr, he talks a lot about going down to the foundation of the house, and pouring a new foundation. Yes, awesome. And that's kind of what that feels like to me, is this kind of questioning everything, burning it all down, seeing what at the end of the day, what do I really believe, and what do I really value, and who is Nate? And I'm curious, within that process, what role intuition played in that.
It still plays a really big role. That process of scraping everything down to the foundation is terrifying. I put more than 35 years of my life into constructing this idea of what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, who I am as a person, who my family is, who God is, what my relationship with God is like, what's going to happen after I die. All of these big questions had really strong answers. And there came a point where the answers that I had weren't sufficient anymore. And it felt like a crisis. It was very scary, very painful, very lonely. And as that edifice, that house that I had been building that comprised my faith for over 3 decades started to come tumbling down, I was left with just a foundation. And that foundation wasn't even God. It was just my values. What do I value? I had to get clear on that. What are my values? Is there good? Is there bad? If, and start from basic 101 level stuff. And on the one hand, that's like really exciting. Like a blank canvas can be exciting because you can put anything you want on that canvas. A blank canvas can be the Mona Lisa was once a blank canvas, and it's now one of the most famous works of art of all time. And it's because somebody decided to put paint on the canvas. But also the potential of a blank canvas can be really intimidating and overwhelming. It's like, where do you start? What do you want to put on there? Am I going to paint a dinosaur? Am I going to paint a person? Am I going to paint a landscape? The options are limitless. And so it can be very overwhelming and intimidating.
Well, and coming from this place of religious perfectionism, like coming from this place of I journal, I write a lot. A new journal is always terrifying for me. Like even writing my name in the, the front page, like, oh, what if I mess it up? What if I screw it up? I want it to be perfect.
Yep.
But there's something to be given a blank canvas and to allow ourselves to be messy with it, to make mistakes, to fail, to figure it out, to question, and to not have it be perfect. I mean, it's kind of, recovering perfectionist syndrome.
It really is.
Which still shows up in weird ways, right? Like it'll show up in controlling weird things, minus food when we travel. Like it shows up in weird ways. So give me like a timeline when kind of you started painting on this new canvas.
It's been a slow and gradual process. I want to give you an analogy first. One of the things that had to take place before I started painting is I had to give myself permission to not do it perfectly. Because I had put so much pressure on myself in the past to be perfect and get it right the first time and not screw up, I had to say, look, I'm going to try stuff on over the rest of my life. And there's going to be things that I choose, ways that I choose to practice and live my life that are going to have to change. Might work for one period of my life and then not work for another, or I might make a decision to go down one path and then realize it was the wrong path. And I have to give myself permission to screw up. My friends, the Figgies, who gave me my first drink of coffee, they do this thing whenever they have a visitor stay at their house. They have the visitor come into the kitchen and take a glass and throw it on the kitchen floor and break it.
I love it.
The reason that they do that is they're like, look, we want you to feel like it's okay to screw up here. You don't need to tiptoe around our home. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be, you don't need to freak out if you break something. Like, you're a part of our home and we love you. And to me, that representation of their love for their house guests is the type of love that I wanted to feel from whatever higher power existed. I'm like, I want to feel like I have permission to screw up and make mistakes and I can still be worthy of love. Because I didn't feel that for my entire life. I knew my parents loved me. I knew, like, logically that God loved me, but I deep down, if I was really honest with myself, I was always afraid that I was going to make a mistake that would deprive me of their love. That there was something that I could do that would make me no longer worthy and that would make me an outcast.
Yes, that withholding of love, that fear of a God that is conditional, a fear of a God. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes, like, as you say that, like, that is the perfect analogy, is this, shattering of a glass in a home, right? Like that shows unconditional love.
Yeah.
And and having those examples and those models of how to be perfectly imperfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really
So
beautiful.
that's where it started for me, is can I allow myself to screw up? And it started with me experimenting a little bit, allowing myself a little bit more freedom to explore the things I was most afraid of and make choices on my own. And some people might balk at that and think that it's really bad. Some people might think it's reckless. I happen to think it's been the thing that has freed me of a lot of the shame and the fear and the anxiety that I felt my entire life. And the thing is 9% of the time, as I've come to the same conclusion that, if the coffee example is a great example, coffee is just not for me. It's not my thing. And most of the time, my choices align with the way I was raised, with my upbringing in the LDS church. But the difference is that now I'm making the choice. Somebody else isn't making it for me. And the reason I'm making the choice isn't because I'm afraid of punishment or afraid of being cut off, severed from the people that I love. It's simply because it just isn't the thing that I want. It doesn't align with my values. So that was a really, for me, an important place to start, is examining what beliefs I wanted to keep and what ones I wanted to get rid of by confronting them head on and getting really curious about them and allowing myself the freedom to make my own choices and make mistakes along the way and learn from those mistakes.
And I think it's important to recognize that curiosity and that questioning is really, really important. And I feel like also within the confines of a lot of different religions, they don't want you to question. They don't want you to explore, to seek for yourself, to find answers, but just do what you're told. And having that curiosity in my own life is what has unlocked so much beauty and so much depth to things that I didn't even know were there.
Yeah, and it's really hard because there is that juxtaposition of the safety and security of a church, of religion, of the gospel that I was raised in. It worked for me for a lot of my life. It was in many ways what I needed, what I craved. Like it felt like home. And I got a lot of good out of it. And I know a lot of people get a lot of good out of being Orthodox believing members of any religion. They wouldn't do it if it wasn't serving them in some way. The hard thing is that when it doesn't work for somebody else, there's not really space for that. There's not a lot of allowance for, it's like, well, this needs to work for you because this is what's supposed to work for everybody. And if it doesn't work for you, there's something wrong with you. There's not something wrong with the system. If there's something that if you're feeling sad or depressed or anxious or miserable or ashamed when you participate in the church, it's not because of the church, it's because you're doing something wrong. And so what happens is the person feels even more sad, more broken, more ashamed, more inadequate. They go examine their lives, try even harder to be perfect, try even harder to obey the rules, feel even worse, and then get the same message. Well, it's not the church, it's not the organization, it's probably you. You're doing something wrong again. And that cocktail can be really difficult for somebody who all they want to feel is what it seems like everybody else is feeling. This is probably the most painful thing for me. And it still is really, really hard to explain. It's like, I know that I have friends and family members who find a lot of joy and a lot of peace and a lot of tranquility and fulfillment and satisfaction out of practicing their religion actively. And I think that's beautiful. And it's hard for me to explain that when I've gone through the same motions and done the same things, that the result was the opposite. I felt more anxious, more inadequate, more afraid, more sad, more depressed, more withdrawn, more disconnected. And I don't know exactly why it works that way, but that's how it works. But there's not space. It's so painful to try and explain that and then have it be met with like judgments or rationalizations or explanations about how I'm wrong in my experience when I've genuinely tried for so long to make it work. The lack of that's probably the most painful aspect of this scrupulosity journey, is not having room for my experience, not having space for my experience to be valid. It doesn't too hard-hearted and too judgmental. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm not trying hard enough. But there's always a reason that puts it on me as to why this experience isn't giving me the same results as it's giving them.
I'm trying to form a question of how would you want someone to respond, or what question would you ask someone else in return? And I think it's always so hard when, especially when you're being spiritually vulnerable, to be met with that resistance. What would you want? How would you want someone to respond?
Just with a little curiosity, like, help me understand how this has been for you. How's it been for you? It's a great question. You know, instead of immediately trying to solve a problem or explain things away, just say, wow, that sounds really hard. Or I'll bet that's been a lonely journey for you. Yeah.
And that feels like acknowledgement. That feels like, I feel a lot within the culture. It is the not conversation, like it's avoided because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it sounds like, no, here someone is sharing something that's hard for them. Let's give it that space. Let's acknowledge it. Let's look at that. It's not a commiserating, it's not a one-upmanship, but it is a seeing, right? It is seeing you and seeing your journey and not minimizing it and trying to solve it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because my faith journey has been simultaneously one of the most painful and difficult journeys I've ever been through, but also one of the most rewarding and fulfilling. And it's come with so much joy and happiness and growth. And there are people in my life that I genuinely love that I can't share any of it with.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to go through a life-defining experience like that and have it be met. I feel very lonely on that journey, very lonely. Yeah. You know, here I am wrestling with God like I thought I was supposed to, trying to figure out what God wants for me, trying to feel God's love, trying to understand who God is and what role he's supposed to play, he or she or they are supposed to play in my life. And trying to kind of gain all this clarity and wrestle with all the shame and the negativity and all these hard things and find a way to make it work. And I have to do it all alone because I can't tell people what's hard. And I also can't tell them what's working because I don't want to, there's a big part of me that I don't want to challenge or speak negatively of their faith experience. You know, I don't want to send somebody down the same journey that I've been down if they don't want to go down it. I don't want to like trigger somebody else's crisis of faith. That's not kind. So here I am, I have this wealth of experience and this incredibly meaningful story that I've been accumulating over the last X number of years. And there's the majority of the people who get to hear it or that I can talk to about it are not the people in my innermost circle. You know, they're not my closest friends and family members. They're people who are on a similar journey, but that often, in many cases, I've never met face to face. You know, we have conversations like this on a podcast or in a private Facebook group, or somebody will message me online and we'll have a chat over Messenger or email. And those conversations are super meaningful. It just breaks my heart a little bit that the people that I care about most are completely oblivious as to what my journey's been like, in large part because I don't want to jeopardize or threaten their faith. And also, I believe I was the same way when I was really active and orthodox in my beliefs. I didn't have the tolerance and the capability to manage the discomfort of having a conversation like that. It's just, it was too much.
Yeah,
it was too much. And
absolutely.
I empathize with that, but it doesn't make it any less difficult.
Yeah. So share with us how you ended up in Costa Rica.
Yeah, Costa Rica was an amalgamation of stressors. We had just had our first baby. So my wife and I found out we were pregnant a couple of months before the pandemic started. So right as we were coming into the pandemic, pregnancy, like that, the nausea and all that stuff happens. My wife is a full-time nurse. She works in the intensive care unit, surgical floor. She takes care of all the adults who stay overnight in the hospital. And she's also a leader in her team. So she's like managing the crisis of this pandemic on the front lines, while people are on the outside saying it's a hoax and it's fake. And she's watching people die, you know, holding the hand of a 45-year-old man with like 5 kids. And he's like crying, saying, am I going to die? And she's like, I think you might, you know, and he's all alone. So I'm sure, and pregnant. So I'm sure she was dealing with like PTSD or anxiety, like all, you name it. Have the baby, postpartum depression hits. That was really rough. And it just kind of got to a point where I asked my wife after our baby had been born and she'd gone back to work after her maternity leave. It was obvious that she was burned out. It was obvious that like we were running on fumes. And I was like, I think we need to change things. Like if you weren't working full time and we could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? And she said, Costa Rica. And I said, how about you quit your job and we do a little research and we see if we can make it happen. And within a couple of weeks, we had found a place to stay for a year. We had found somebody to rent our house. And it was just a matter of like packing up all of our belongings and getting on the plane. And then the other really big thing for us was we were both going through this faith journey, like having a baby. We've been going through it for a long time, but then having a child, you start to ask yourself, how do we want to raise this baby, this human that we've been given? And do we want to raise this baby the same way that we've been raised? And if not, how do we want to raise this baby differently? And it made us really confront the church culture that we grew up in and ask some really hard and serious questions. And we figured going away to Costa Rica would allow us to make some decisions without the pressure and influence of the church community that we've been raised in and friends and family who were all raising their families a certain way. Like if we made different choices, it would probably be easier if we were a little bit farther away. So all of those things kind of compiled into one, gave us the courage to move out here and maybe see who we were without all of that.
That's really beautiful. And beautiful that because of your journey, because of the courage that you had to do things in a way that was different than what has been done before, to create this new reality of what does life look like for the Bagleys.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. Still scary. This is the first time I've talked about it really publicly. And I still have this fear in the back of my head of who's going to be upset, who's going to be angry, who's going to be disappointed, who's going to want to sever their relationship with me, who's, you know, it's scary. I still have that scrupulous trigger in the back of my brain that has me anxious.
But thank you for sharing, even in the midst of your fear and in the midst of that running, because it matters and this conversation is important. So thank you for just always being you, being just so heart-led and heart-filled, and for being vulnerable in a space that affects mental health, that affects our physical health and our spiritual health, in, you know, a hope and a desire that others can hear this and say, yeah, I've been there too.
Yeah. And the more I talk about this, I want to hit that home. The more I talk about scrupulosity, the more people go, oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like my experience. Can never say no, always have to serve more, be a little bit better, try a little bit harder, never good enough, always worried about letting somebody down, always feel obligated to pick up everybody else's slack. And it can get exhausting. You can get spiritual burnout. You can become really anxious and obsessive over things. And long term, don't really matter who's dealing with that. Anybody that, if my stories resonated with anybody today, I just want to let you know that it's normal, and that there's a lot of help out there when you start looking for it. And one of the most world is when you stop making choices because you're afraid and start making them because you're courageous enough to live your values. Even if the choices are exactly the same choice, there's so much less anxiety and so much less negative emotion is probably the best all encapsulating phrase when it's about when you're making values led choices.
That's beautiful. How can our listeners connect with you?
Well, most of the work that I do is in the relationship space. So if you want to check out more about what I do, a great place to go would be roommatesyndrome.com. And I try and help couples, oftentimes going through a situation like this, like a spiritual transition or a faith transition, or maybe a kid transition, or you just feel like you've been drifting apart for a while, the spark started to fade. How do you get it back? How do you reconnect? And how do you get back in alignment with your values?
Thank you so much, Nate. Just such a joy to talk with you.
Thanks.